Revna had not woken up this morning, expecting to stand in the middle of the king's throne room, while the most dangerous alpha in existence crouched 3 feet away from her, half-shifted and snarling. But here she was. His claws had torn grooves into the stone floor. His shoulders were too wide, his spine bent at an angle that was not quite human, and the sound coming from his throat was low and constant and awful. Like something vast grinding against something it could not break. The amber had swallowed the green in his eyes entirely. There was nothing human left in that stare. Nothing that recognized her, or the room, or the 15 men who had flattened themselves against the walls, in frozen, shaking terror. Lord Hadrian, the king's beta, stood near the far door with his hand raised in a gesture that clearly meant nobody move. His face was chalk white. 2 guards had drawn swords, but their hands trembled so badly the blades caught the light in stuttering flashes. One advisor had knocked over his chair, trying to get away. Another had simply stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open, his report crumpled in his fist. The king turned his head toward the fallen chair. The growl deepened. Every person in the room stopped breathing. Revna had lost all sensation in her legs. She had lost everything except the violent hammering of her own heart and the absolute, marrow-deep certainty that if she moved, even slightly, she was going to die. She had come here to treat a horse. She was a horse healer. She had no business being in this room, no authority, no weapon, no idea what to do. And the king of the realm was 3 feet away from her, more wolf than man, and the distance between them was shrinking. He moved toward her, not fast, slow, deliberate, his claws clicking against the stone with each step. His head dropped low, his nostrils flaring, pulling in her scent. Revna's vision blurred at the edges. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, a frantic, useless drumbeat counting down to something she could not stop. Then he stopped. His head tilted, the growl faltered, stuttered, and faded into something softer, a low rumble that vibrated through the air between them, and Revna felt it settle against her ribs. The coiled tension in his massive shoulders loosened by a fraction, then another. His claws retracted slowly, the sharp scrape of bone sliding back beneath skin. The impossible angle of his spine straightened, and his breathing changed. Deeper, slower, like a gale, deciding not to make landfall after all. Revna stood perfectly still, too stunned to understand what was happening, too paralyzed to question it. The king leaned forward, his face still half-shifted, and pressed his nose to the curve of her throat. She felt the heat of his breath against her skin, felt the impossible presence of him surrounding her, and then his eyes closed. The feral brightness drained from his irises, and the deep forest green returned. His body shuddered, once, twice, and then settled. His forehead came to rest against her collarbone. His breathing evened into something quiet and almost peaceful. The throne room went still as held water. Lord Hadrian lowered his hand slowly. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The 2 guards exchanged a look that contained every human emotion in rapid succession. The advisor, with the crumpled report, made a small, strangled sound in the back of his throat. Revna did not move. She would not risk it. She stood there with the Alpha King pressed against her throat, his heat soaking through her worn linen shirt, and she thought, very clearly, I was supposed to be treating a horse. But to understand how the most admired woman in the kingdom ended up in the king's throne room with a feral alpha pressed against her pulse, we need to go back. Back to that morning, back to the horse. It had started with a summons. Not a formal one, not the kind sealed with wax and delivered by a herald. Just a message, scrawled in hurried ink on a folded piece of parchment, asking for the gentle hand by name. The king's warhorse, a massive black stallion named Wrath, had thrown 3 stable hands, bitten a guardsman and kicked a hole clean through his stall door. No one could get near him. The beast was in agony from a deep gash along his flank that had gone septic, and the pain had turned him savage. Someone in the castle had heard of Revna Oaks. Everyone in the kingdom had heard of Revna Oaks. They called her the Gentle Hand. They said she could calm any creature, heal any beast, soothe any animal, no matter how wild or wounded. Men brought her dying war horses, and she brought them back. Women carried fevered hunting dogs to her door at midnight, and she never turned them away. Farmers traveled 3 days with lame oxen just to stand in her yard and watch her work. She was admired. Universally, openly, almost reverently admired. People wrote songs about her, and strangers bowed when she walked through market towns, and young men brought her wildflowers they had picked on the road, hoping she might remember their names. She never did, not because she was unkind, but because none of them ever stayed long enough to matter. They admired her from a distance, they praised her to their friends, and then they married someone else. That part she kept to herself. Revna had arrived at the castle gates just after dawn, her satchel over her shoulder, her boots still damp from the morning dew. She had walked since first light, following the road that wound up from the valley floor through terraced farmland and patches of ancient forest. The castle grew larger with every turn, and by the time she reached the outer walls, it loomed above her, all dark, stone and iron, and the distant snap of banners in the wind. She had never been inside a castle before. She had never had a reason to be. A guard had met her at the gate and walked her through corridors she had never seen before. Stone walls hung with tapestries, depicting battles she had only heard about in songs. Brass lanterns flickered in alcoves. The smell of beeswax and old iron hung in the air, and everything about the place felt ancient and deliberate, and far too important for a woman who spent most of her days with her arms elbow-deep in horse liniment. The royal stables were enormous, easily 4 times the size of any barn she had worked in, and the sound of Wrath's fury reached her before she even stepped through the doors. The stallion was throwing himself against the walls of his reinforced stall. The wood groaned and splintered with each impact. 2 stable hands stood at a cautious distance, looking exhausted and afraid. Dagny Hargrove, the royal stablemaster, was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that suggested she had seen everything at least twice and had not been impressed either time. She looked Revna up and down and said, "You are smaller than I expected." "I get that a lot," Revna replied. Dagny grunted and gestured toward the stall. "He has been this way for 2 days. We have tried everything. Sedatives, muzzles, hobbles. He bit through the last rope in under a minute. Did you try asking nicely?" Dagny gave her a look that could have curdled milk. Revna approached the stall slowly. Inside, Wrath stood taut as a bowstring, his ears flat, his nostrils wide, every muscle trembling with pain and fury. The wound on his flank was angry and swollen, the flesh around it hot to the touch, even from a distance. She could smell the infection, sour and sharp and wrong. "Hello," she said softly. The stallion's head snapped toward her, his lip curled back from his teeth, a warning. "I know," Revna murmured, "it hurts. I can see that." She kept her voice low, even a current that she had used 1,000 times before. She pressed her palm flat against the stall door and let him catch her scent. "I am not going to rush you. We have time." She did not know how long she stood there talking. Minutes, maybe. She told the horse about the morning, about the walk up the hill to the castle, about the fog in the valley, and the sound the river made where it bent around the old mill. She told him about the 3 goats she had left in her neighbor's care, and how one of them, a mischievous gray nanny named Biscuit, had a habit of eating laundry off clotheslines. Meaningless things. Gentle things. The kind of words that carried no threat and no demand. Wrath's ears came forward, his breathing slowed. The taut fury in his body softened, and he stepped toward the stall door, lowering his great head until his muzzle touched her open palm. Behind her, Dagny exhaled sharply. Revna slipped inside the stall and began working on the wound. The horse stood still for her, trembling slightly, but allowing it, his dark eye, watching her with something that looked almost like trust. She cleaned the wound, applied the drying poultice, and murmured to him the entire time in that same low, rolling cadence. She did not hear the footsteps behind her. She did not know the king had entered the stable until his voice cut through the quiet. "How is he?" Revna startled, nearly dropping the cloth she was using to clean the wound. She turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to take up far more space than any single person should. King Athan Calder was tall in the way that mountains are tall, in a way that made everything around him seem diminished by comparison. His dark hair was cut short, and the hard lines of his face looked as though they had been carved rather than born. His jaw was set tight. His eyes, the deep, cold green of forest shadow, swept over her with the kind of focus that made her feel as though she was being read rather than seen. He looked exhausted. The hollows beneath his eyes were deep enough to hold shadows, and there was a tension in his frame that went beyond tiredness. It looked as though something inside him was wound so tight it was on the verge of snapping. Rath's ears went flat again. The stallion stamped and snorted, picking up on something Revna could not place. Some tension radiating from the king that was setting the horse on edge. She felt it too. A pressure, in the air, heavy and charged. The way the sky feels in the moment before thunder. "Easy," Revna said. But she was not sure if she was talking to the horse or to herself. She kept her voice in that same low rolling cadence, her hand moving in slow circles on Rath's neck. "Easy now, you are all right. Everything is all right." The stallion settled, and behind her something else settled too. The air pressure dropped. The charged, crackling tension that had followed the king into the stable simply dissolved, burning off the way mist burns off under a morning sun. Revna felt it go and blinked, confused, unsure what had changed. She glanced over her shoulder. The king was standing completely still. His eyes, which had been sharp and restless a moment ago, had gone soft, unfocused. His taut posture had loosened, and his hands, which had been clenched into fists at his sides, hung open and relaxed. He looked, for the first time since she had laid eyes on him, like a man who is not at war with himself. Then Dagny's intake of breath, sharp and sudden, broke the moment. Revna looked at the stable master and found the older woman staring at the king with an expression Revna had never seen on that weathered face before. Not fear. Something closer to disbelief. Something closer to hope. The moment lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the king blinked, shook his head slightly as though surfacing from deep water, and the tension snapped back into his frame. His eyes sharpened, his jaw tightened. He looked at Revna with a frown that contained more confusion than hostility, then turned and left the stable without a word. Revna stared after him. "What just happened?" she asked. Dagny did not answer. She was already moving toward the stable doors, her face set with purpose. "Finish with the horse," she called back over her shoulder, "and do not leave the grounds." The words hit Revna with a jolt. Do not leave the grounds. The kind of thing you might say to someone who is in trouble. Or someone who was about to be. She finished treating Rath in a daze, her hands competent from years of practice even as her mind raced. What had she done? Had she offended the king somehow? Had she been too familiar? Had she not bowed? She was almost certain she had not bowed. That evening, alone in the small guest room she had been given, Revna sat on the edge of the narrow bed and tried to make sense of the day. She had been told to stay, not asked, told, by the stable master, who answered to the king, who had looked at her as though she were a puzzle he had not consented to solve. Her wolf stirred faintly beneath her skin. Just a flicker, so brief she almost missed it. She had never been a strong shifter. Her wolf had always been quiet, dormant, content to sleep while Revna lived her human life. But something had moved in there tonight, a restlessness she had no name for. She barely slept. The knock came before sunrise. A guard stood in the corridor, his face carefully blank. "The king's beta requests your presence," he said. Immediately. Lord Hadrian's office was a narrow room, lined with maps and smelling faintly of ink and cold tea. The beta himself was younger than Revna had expected, perhaps 30, with close-cropped auburn hair and the kind of calm, measured expression that suggested he was always thinking 3 steps ahead of whatever was happening in front of him. "Miss Oakes," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." Revna sat. Her hands were shaking, so she pressed them together in her lap and willed them to stop. "You treated the king's horse yesterday," Hadrian said. "And while you were treating the horse, the king entered the stables." Revna's stomach dropped. "Yes, my lord. I did not hear him come in. I should have bowed." "I am so sorry." Something flickered across Hadrian's face. Not anger. Something she could not read. "The king does not care about bowing," he said. "What I need to understand is what you did." Revna blinked at him. "I treated the horse." And nothing. "I cleaned the wound, applied a poultice, and talked to the stallion to keep him calm." "Talk to him," Hadrian repeated. "It is what I do," Revna said, feeling suddenly defensive. "I talk to animals. It calms them. I have been doing it since I was a child." "And did anything unusual happen while you were talking?" Revna hesitated. The moment in the stable, the strange dissolving of pressure, the king going still and soft. She had felt it. She had seen Dagny's reaction, but she did not know what it meant, and she was afraid that whatever it meant, it was going to cost her. "The king seemed to relax," she said carefully, "but I was focused on the horse. I did not do anything to His Majesty." Hadrian studied her for a long moment. His fingers tapped once against the desk, a small unconscious gesture that told Revna he was choosing his next words with great care. "What I am about to tell you does not leave this room," he said. That phrase, Revna had learned, was never followed by good news. "The king has been suffering from a condition that we have kept hidden from the court. His wolf is becoming increasingly difficult to control. The episodes are growing more frequent and more severe. He shifts without warning, sometimes partially, sometimes fully, and each time it takes longer to pull him back." Hadrian paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "He is losing ground, Miss Oakes, and he is losing it quickly." Revna felt the blood drain from her face. She thought of the tension she had sensed in the stable. The pressure in the air. The way the horse had reacted to the king's presence, picking up on something dangerous that she had only half perceived. "Yesterday, in your presence, the episodes stopped completely," Hadrian continued. "For the first time in months, the room seemed to contract around her." "We need to test this again," the beta said, "under controlled conditions. Would you be willing to sit in the same room as the king during a council meeting today?" "You want me to just sit there?" Revna asked. "That is all. And if something happens? If he has one of these episodes while I am in the room?" Hadrian's expression did not change, but the pause that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. "If something happens," he said finally, "I need to know whether your presence stops it." She wanted to say no. Every instinct she had screamed at her to refuse, to pack her bag, to walk back down the hill to her quiet cottage with its herb garden and its view of the river, and never think about the king's green eyes going soft again. But there was something in Hadrian's voice beneath the control, something desperate and nearly broken that he was working very hard to conceal. This was not a casual request. This was a man watching his king die by inches and willing to try anything. "All right," Revna said. "I will sit in the room." The walk to the council chamber felt like the longest walk of her life. Hadrian positioned her on a bench along the wall, close enough to the king's chair that she could have reached out and touched his arm, but far enough that her presence might go unnoticed. The council members filed in one by one, shooting curious glances at the unfamiliar woman sitting against the wall. King Athen entered last. He did not look at her. He sat, opened a report, and began reviewing the day's agenda with his advisors. His movements were controlled, precise, deliberate in a way that reminded Revna of a man walking across ice, testing each step before committing his full weight. 20 minutes passed. The discussion moved from border patrols to harvest projections. The king asked sharp questions. He made notes. He was, by every visible measure, in complete command. Then Revna saw his hand stop moving. The pen went still against the page. His fingers tightened around it, knuckles going white. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His breathing changed, quickened, and she saw the first flicker of amber bleed into the green of his irises. The advisor who was speaking did not notice. No one noticed except Hadrian, whose gaze had locked onto the king with the focused attention of a man watching a lit fuse. Revna did not think. She did not plan. She simply started talking. Not to anyone. Not loudly. Just a soft murmur, barely above a whisper, the same cadence she used with frightened animals, the same rhythm, the same tone, meaningless words about nothing at all, the weather outside, the color of the leaves she had seen on her walk that morning, the sound the river made in the valley below the castle, the shift light in the king's eyes flickered, stuttered, pulled back the way a wave retreats from a shore. His grip on the pen loosened, his breathing deepened, the coiled tension in his spine unwound, vertebra by vertebra, until he sat back in his chair and exhaled, a long, shaking breath that seemed to carry the burden of months. He did not look at her, but his hand, resting on the table, had stopped trembling. Across the room, Hadrian closed his eyes. Just for a moment, when he opened them again, Revna saw something in them that made her chest tighten. Relief so profound, it looked almost like grief. The meeting continued. The king worked. Revna sat and said nothing more, her pulse hammering, her mind a whirlwind of questions she did not dare ask. When the meeting ended, the king rose and left, without acknowledging her. The room emptied. Hadrian appeared at her side. "It worked," he said quietly. It was not a coincidence. Revna pressed her hands together to keep them from shaking. "What happens now?" The beta looked at her with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and apology. "Now," he said, "we discuss an arrangement." The arrangement, as Hadrian called it, was simple. Revna would remain in the castle. She would be present during the king's meetings, his working hours, and any situation where an episode might occur. She would sit, be quiet, and exist in his proximity. In exchange, she would be housed, fed, and compensated generously. It sounded clinical, practical, entirely manageable. It was none of those things. The first few days were agonizing. Revna sat in the king's private study, on a hard wooden chair against the wall, while Affan worked at his desk. He did not speak to her. He did not look at her. He moved through his reports and correspondence, as though she were a piece of furniture, and the quiet between them was so thick she could have drowned in it. She tried to stay quiet. She lasted 2 days. On the third morning, while the king reviewed a stack of land dispute petitions, Revna started talking, not to him, exactly, just out loud the way she talked when she was alone with animals. She told the room about the time a farmer had brought her a goat that had eaten an entire basket of soap and spent the rest of the day foaming at the mouth. She described the goat's expression, the farmer's horror, the way the animal had burped bubbles for a solid hour afterward. The king did not react. He kept reading. But his pen did not move for a full minute, and when Revna glanced at him, the hard line of his mouth had softened by the smallest fraction. The next day she told him about the hunting dog that had been brought to her, with a porcupine quill lodged so deeply in its nose that the poor beast sneezed every time someone said a word starting with the letter S. She had spent 3 hours extracting quills, while the owner stood behind her shouting encouragement and accidentally triggering sneezing fits every other sentence. Still, no response. But on the 4th day, a different chair appeared in the study, not the hard wooden one, a proper chair with a cushion and armrests, and a throw blanket folded neatly over one side. It had been placed exactly where the old one had sat, as though it had always been there. Revna looked at the chair, she looked at the king. He was reading a report and did not glance up. "Thank you for the chair," she said. "What chair?" he replied without raising his eyes. She sat in it and said nothing, but something small and warm kindled in her chest, and she let it stay. On the 5th day, she told him about the time she had been called to help birth a foal in the middle of a thunderstorm. The mare had panicked, the stable had flooded, and Revna had delivered the foal knee-deep in filthy water, with lightning cracking overhead and a barn cat clinging to the top of her head with all 4 sets of claws. "The cat was on your head the entire time?" Athen asked. Revna froze. It was the first question he had asked her, the first words he had spoken to her voluntarily since the arrangement began. "The entire time," she confirmed, trying to keep the surprise from her voice. Her name was Duchess, and she had very strong opinions about where the safest spot in any room was, and the safest spot was your head, apparently. She also drooled when she was nervous, so by the time the foal finally arrived, I had a soggy, terrified cat on my head and a face full of cat drool, very dignified. A beat of pause. Short, quiet, almost involuntary. Not quite a laugh, but close enough that Revna felt heat bloom in her chest. Days became weeks. The rhythm deepened. Revna talked, and the king listened, and slowly, in fragments and half-sentences, he began to talk back. He asked about her work, her methods, how she had learned to calm animals. She told him about growing up in the village at the base of the valley, about discovering as a child that animals responded to her voice in ways they did not respond to anyone else. She told him about the old mare that had followed her home from a neighboring farm when she was 7, and how her mother had found the horse standing patiently outside the kitchen window waiting. "People too," she added one evening, then immediately wished she had not. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the focus of his gaze made the air feel thin. "Is that what you think you are doing here?" he asked quietly. "Calming the animal?" Revna met his eyes. "I think I am doing whatever needs to be done." Something crossed his face, something complicated and exposed that she did not fully understand. Then he looked away, and the moment passed. There was a tea that appeared one morning, not the ordinary black tea the servants brought. This was elderflower and honey, the blend Revna had mentioned once, offhandedly, while telling a story about her grandmother. It sat on the small table beside her chair, in a ceramic cup with a chipped handle, and neither of them mentioned it. The next morning, it was there again, and the one after that. One afternoon, a council meeting ran late. Revna had been sitting against the wall for 3 hours, and her back was stiff and sore. She shifted, trying to find a comfortable angle, and her elbow knocked against the windowsill behind her. The sound was small, barely a tap, but the king paused mid-sentence and glanced at her. "Am I boring you?" he asked. Every advisor in the room turned to look at her. Revna's face caught fire. "No, your majesty. My elbow slipped." "Your elbow?" he repeated. "It has a mind of its own sometimes." One of the advisors coughed to cover what was very clearly a laugh. The king turned back to his report, but the corner of his mouth had twitched, and Revna caught Hadrian watching her with an expression that was almost, impossibly, amused. Later that week, she arrived at the study to find a second cushion on her chair. This one was embroidered with tiny horses. She stared at it, then at the king, who was already seated and reading as though nothing in the world had changed. "This cushion has horses on it," she said. "Does it?" he replied, not looking up. "Little embroidered horses. How peculiar." She sat on it and bit her lip to keep from smiling. The cushion was absurdly comfortable. He began asking her questions that had nothing to do with healing. What did the valley look like in winter? Did the river freeze? What kind of birds nested in the mill's eaves? She answered all of them, charmed and confused in equal measure by his quiet curiosity. He listened the way he did everything else, with total focus, as though her descriptions of frost patterns on fence posts were matters of state requiring his full attention. She found herself looking forward to the evenings. Not for the arrangement, not because it was her duty, but because when the advisors left and the door closed, And it was just the two of them in the firelit study. The king became someone else. Someone who asked about birds and noticed when she liked elderflower tea and left embroidered cushions on chairs without ever admitting he had done it. Someone she was beginning to know. Her wolf stirred more frequently now, pressing against the inside of her skin whenever Ethan entered the room. Not urgently, not painfully, but with a quiet insistence that grew harder to ignore each day. She felt the pull toward him growing stronger each day. A gravitational tug that had nothing to do with the arrangement and everything to do with something she was not yet ready to name. But the episodes were not gone. They were less frequent with Revna nearby, but they still came. She learned to read the signs. The subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers would curl against whatever surface they rested on. The first trace of that inhuman brightness at the edges of his irises, catching and flaring before she could talk it down. When they came, she talked. And they passed. Until the night, they did not. She had been walking back to her room after a late evening in the study when she heard it. A crash from behind the king's closed door, followed by a sound that made every hair on her body stand on end. Not a growl. Something deeper, more guttural, more animal than anything she had heard from him before. Revna pushed open the door without thinking. Athen was on the floor. His shirt was torn. His claws were fully extended, digging into the stone, and his body was shaking with the effort of holding something back. The wolf's color had taken his eyes completely this time. It was solid, burning, consuming. His wolf was almost fully forward, and the man behind it was barely visible. "Get out," he snarled. But the words came out wrong. Too deep. Too many teeth. Revna dropped to her knees beside him and grabbed his face with both hands. The moment her skin touched his, the world split open. She was standing on a battlefield. Smoke choked the air. Bodies lay in the mud, human and wolf alike, and the stench of blood was so thick she could taste it on her tongue. A voice she did not recognize was screaming something in a language she did not understand, and the words burned. They burned in the air, and they were aimed at the man kneeling in the center of the devastation, covered in the aftermath of battle. She saw a woman, old and broken, kneeling over a dead wolf with silver fur. The woman's mouth was moving, shaping words that twisted the air around them into something dark and living, and the words sank into Athen, buried themselves deep, and took root. Revna gasped and wrenched her hands away. She was back in the king's chambers. Athen was staring at her, the feral glow fading from his eyes, his breathing ragged and harsh. His hand had found her wrist at some point, and his grip was almost painfully tight. "What did you see?" he demanded. Revna could not answer. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. She had felt those words, the burning ones. She had felt them land. "What did you see?" he repeated, and the last word came out splintered. A battlefield," Revna whispered. "A woman. She was saying something. And it went into you. It went into you, and it is still there." The look on his face nearly destroyed her. It was the look of a man who had been carrying something monstrous alone and had just watched someone else find it. The next morning, Dagny found Revna in the stables, brushing wrath in long mechanical strokes. Her hands moved on instinct. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. "You saw something last night," Dagny said. It was not a question. Revna kept brushing. "How long have you known?" Dagny leaned against the stall door and crossed her arms. "Since the beginning." "Hadrian told me the night you arrived." "Told you what, exactly?" Dagny let out a long breath, and the sound carried the fatigue of someone who had been holding information for too long. "There was a war 3 years ago. A rogue pack on the eastern border, led by an alpha named Torvan. Raids on villages, attacks on trade routes, violence against innocents. The king tried negotiations. He sent envoys, offered territory, resources, peace terms that were more than generous. Torvan rejected every one. He wanted dominion, not peace." Revna's hands stilled on the horse's flank. "The final battle was at Ashenmoor," Dagny continued. A valley between two ridgelines, thick forest on both sides. The kind of terrain that turns strategy into chaos the moment the fighting starts. It was brutal. 3 days of fighting before the king had no choice but to shift fully, to become the wolf completely, to end it. And he did end it. Torvan fell. She paused. But so did a great many others, soldiers on both sides. Civilians who had sheltered in the valley thinking they would be safe, wolves who had surrendered and were caught in the crossfire before the order to stop reached the front lines. Revna's throat tightened. She could see Ashenmore in her mind now, pieced together from the vision she had been pulled into. The smoke, the mud, the bodies, and the woman I saw? Revna asked. Sathara? Torvin's mother. A hedge witch with enough spite to be dangerous, and enough grief to make her reckless. Dagny's expression hardened. She cursed him while her son's body was still warm. Every word she spoke was designed to unravel the barrier between the man and the wolf, to make the wolf consume him from the inside out. So, the episodes are not natural, Revna said, her voice hollow. They are not natural, and they are getting worse. Dagny looked at her squarely. The curse works by feeding on guilt, Revna. The king blames himself for every life lost in that war. Every soldier who fell under his command. Every civilian caught in the crossfire. And the curse latches onto that guilt and uses it to pull the wolf forward. The more he suffers, the stronger it gets. Revna thought of the battlefield she had seen, the bodies in the mud, the blood on his hands, the way he had looked at her when she came back from the vision. Not angry, but exposed, as though she had walked into a room he had locked from the inside. He thinks he deserves this, she said quietly. He has never said those words. He does not have to. A long pause settled between them. Wrath shifted his weight and nudged Revna's shoulder with his nose, the way he always did when he sensed her mood turning dark. There is something else, Dagny said carefully. Something Hadrian asked me to tell you. The older woman studied Revna's face, measuring how much truth the girl could bear. The healers believe the reason you can calm his wolf is that the wolf has recognized you as something specific. Revna's stomach clenched. She already knew what was coming. She had felt it for weeks. The pull, the restlessness, the way her own wolf pressed toward the surface every time he walked into a room. She had been telling herself it was anxiety, fear. Recognize me as what? She asked anyway, as his mate. The word landed with the force of a hammer on glass. Revna felt the impact spread through her body in slow, irreversible cracks. That is not possible, she heard herself say. And yet, here we are. Revna shook her head. I am a horse healer from a valley village. I am not a mate for a king. Dagny's expression softened into something almost gentle. The wolf does not care about rank, child. No, Revna said, and the word came out harder than she intended, but the world does. The court does. Every lord and lady in the kingdom has an opinion about who should stand beside the king, and not one of them would name a woman who smells of horse liniment and goat soap. And since when, Dagny replied calmly, has the opinion of lords and ladies mattered to you? Revna opened her mouth to argue, and found she had nothing to say, because Dagny was right. She had never cared what the nobility thought of her. What she cared about, what she had always cared about, was whether anyone would ever look past the gift and see her. Not the gentle hand, not the woman who could calm beasts, just Revna. She had been admired her entire life. But admiration and love were not the same thing, and she had learned the difference a long time ago. Admiration stood at a respectful distance. Love closed the gap. No one had ever closed the gap. Does he know? Revna asked. He suspects, Dagny said, which is precisely what worries me. Before Revna could ask what that meant, the stable doors slammed open. Hadrian stood in the entrance breathing hard. His usual composure was gone. Come quickly, he said. Both of you. It is bad. They found the king in the corridor outside his chambers. 3 guards lay on the ground. One was bleeding from a gash across his shoulder. Another was unconscious, slumped against the wall. The third was on his knees, cradling his arm against his chest, his face white with pain. Athens stood at the center of it, half-shifted, his claws still extended, his breath coming in ragged, tearing gasps. The wolf blazed behind his eyes, brighter than Revna had ever seen it. His wolf was almost fully forward, straining against whatever thread of control the man still held. But he was still there. She could see it in the way his hand shook, in the way his claws kept retracting and extending, fighting for every inch, in the way his face was twisted, not with rage, but with horror, at what his own body had done. "Athen," Revna said. His head snapped toward her. A growl tore from his throat, low and warning. "Athen, look at me." She stepped forward. Behind her, Hadrian made a sharp sound of protest. She ignored him. "I am right here," she said, her voice low and even. "Come back." The wolf in him lunged, not at her, past her, toward the wall, slamming his fist into the stone with a crack that echoed down the corridor. But his other hand reached for her, caught her wrist, and held on as though she were the last solid thing left in a world coming apart. His claws retracted. The wolf's brightness bled away. And when his eyes were green again, and the man was fully back, and he saw the unconscious guards on the floor and the blood on his own hands, his face crumbled. "Get her out of here," he said to Hadrian, his voice wrecked. "Get her out of the castle, Your Majesty," Revna started. "This is over." His hand released her wrist as though her skin had burned him. "Whatever arrangement we had, it is finished. I want her gone by morning." "You need me here," Revna said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I need you alive," Athens shot back. The last word came apart in his mouth. He turned away from her, pressing his bloodied hands against the stone wall, his shoulders heaving. "I could have killed them. I could have killed you. Do you understand that? Do you understand what I am becoming?" "You are becoming nothing," Revna said fiercely. "You are fighting and you are still here, and that means something. It means I am not finished yet," he said, so quietly she almost did not hear it. "But I will be. And when I am, I need you to be somewhere far away from me." He pressed his forehead against the stone, and the movement was so defeated, so devoid of the power she had seen in him, that it made her chest crack open. "Athen, please." "I have never asked anyone for anything," he said, still facing the wall. "I am asking you now, leave, before I become the thing I am trying to protect you from." The pleas had shattered her. But this quiet, ruined honesty, finished the job. Kings did not say please. Not like that. Not with their voice scraped thin and their body trembling and their face turned to the wall so no one could see them break. Revna wanted to fight, wanted to refuse. But Hadrian's hand closed gently around her arm, and the look he gave her said, "Not now." She let herself be led away, her vision blurring, her chest aching with something that had a name she was not yet brave enough to speak. In the morning, she was gone. Revna's cottage sat at the bottom of the valley, where the river bent around the old mill. It was small and warm, and had always smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke and everything safe. But when she pushed open the door, after 2 days of walking, it did not feel like home anymore. Nothing did. The first 3 days, she tried to resume her old life. She treated a farmer's mare with a swollen fetlock. She mixed a poultice for a shepherd's dog with a torn ear. She went through the motions with hands that knew the work even when her mind was elsewhere. But something was wrong. The mare flinched when Revna touched her. The dog whimpered and pulled away. A barn cat that had always curled in her lap hissed and fled when she reached for it. Biscuit the goat, who had greeted her at the gate every morning for 2 years, stood at the far end of the pen and would not come near. Her gift was not failing. It was fractured. The calm she had always carried, the evenness that animals sensed and trusted, was gone. In its place was a vibrating, restless ache that pulsed through her body. A second heartbeat that did not belong to her and would not stop. Eating was impossible. Food tasted of nothing. Sleep was worse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that feral glow bleeding into green and felt the desperate grip of his hand around her wrist. She could not sit still. Her wolf, fully awake now and howling beneath her skin, paced endlessly inside her, demanding something she could not give it. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the wash basin on the fifth morning and barely recognized the woman staring back, thinner, paler, dark circles carved beneath her eyes that reminded her horribly of his. On the fifth day, a merchant, passing through the village, brought news from the capital. The king had cancelled all public audiences. The council was meeting behind closed doors. Rumors were spreading that the alpha was unwell, that his wolf was becoming uncontrollable, that the episodes were happening daily now. Some said he had locked himself in his chambers. Others said they had heard him howling at night, a sound that carried across the castle grounds and made the guards cross themselves. Revna's hands shook so badly, she spilled an entire jar of elfwort tincture across her workbench. On the seventh day, more news arrived. The council had proposed a solution. Lady Felaine Ashworth, the daughter of the most powerful noble house in the eastern provinces, had been put forward as a candidate for the king's mate. The theory was that a formal mate bond with a woman of strong alpha bloodline might anchor his wolf where nothing else could. The bonding ceremony was being arranged. Invitations had been sent. Revna stood in her kitchen and felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Of course they would find someone else. Someone appropriate. Someone with a name and a bloodline and a title. Someone who belonged in a castle beside a king, not a woman. Who talked to horses and smelled of goat soap and had spent her entire life being admired from a safe, respectful, unbridgeable distance. The gentle hand. Always needed. Never chosen. She tried to picture it. Lady Felaine, standing where she had stood, sitting in the chair with the horse cushion, drinking elderflower tea from the chipped ceramic cup. Lady Felaine's voice filling the study, telling stories to calm a wolf that was not hers, and never would be. The jealousy surprised her with its ferocity, not polite envy, not a wistful pang. A snarling, possessive fury that rose up from somewhere deep and primal and absolutely certain. Her wolf, howling beneath her skin, rejecting the idea, with every fiber of its being. He is mine, something inside her snarled. And I am his. And no ceremony, and no bloodline, and no council vote will change that. The fury burned for a moment, bright and clean. Then it guttered out, and left nothing behind but grief. Because the truth was simpler and sadder than jealousy. He had chosen to let her go. He had looked at her and decided, deliberately, that protecting her was worth losing her, and she did not know how to fight someone else's decision to sacrifice themselves for her sake. She sat down on the kitchen floor and pressed her back against the wall and wrapped her arms around her knees, and did not cry. She wanted to. She felt the pressure of it building behind her eyes and in her throat and in the hollow space beneath her ribs. But the tears would not come. Something in her had gone too numb for tears. On the ninth day, a rider arrived at her door. Dagny's handwriting on the folded note was sharp and hurried. The king's warhorse was refusing to eat. 3 days now. Wrath would take food from no one. Dagny was requesting Revna's help with the horse. Nothing more. Revna knew it was an excuse. She went anyway. The ride to the castle took a full day. By the time she arrived, she was lightheaded from the lack of proper food and sleep, and the ache in her chest had become a constant, grinding pressure that made every breath feel earned. Wrath was in a bad way. The stallion stood in his stall with his head low, his ribs visible, his dark eyes dull and lifeless. He perked up slightly when Revna entered, allowing her to stroke his neck, but even that small connection felt muted. She could feel the fracture in her own gift the way you feel, a crack in bone, a wrongness that made everything harder than it should be. "You look terrible," Dagny said from the stall door. "The horse, or me," Revna asked both. Revna leaned her forehead against Wrath's neck and closed her eyes. How is he? And do not soften it. Dagny was quiet for a moment. He had 4 episodes yesterday. Hadrian can barely contain them anymore. The council is pushing for the Ashworth girl to arrive by month's end. They believe a formal bonding ceremony will stabilize him. Will it work? Revna asked, hating herself for the smallness of her voice. No, Dagny said flatly. The wolf has already chosen. It will not accept a substitute, and forcing a bond with the wrong person could accelerate the curse rather than slow it. I have told the council this. Hadrian has told the council this. They are not listening. Then why are they doing it? Because they are out of options. And because no one in that council understands what you and I understand. Which is what? That the wolf chose you, Dagny said. And that you leaving is killing both of you. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Revna pressed her hand against Wrath's side and felt the horse's heartbeat against her palm, slow and real. I need to see him, she said. He will not agree to it. I do not need his agreement. Dagny studied her for a long moment. A slow smile, small and grim, but real, crossed the older woman's face. Then she stepped aside. Revna found him by instinct. She was crossing the inner courtyard, the autumn wind pulling at her hair, when she felt it, a pull so sharp and sudden it nearly knocked her sideways. She turned and saw him on the far side of the yard, walking with Hadrian, his stride stiff and controlled. He was thinner than she remembered. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened into bruises, and the tension in his body looked less like coiled strength and more like a structure on the verge of collapse. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. For one breath, his mask slipped. Need flashed across his face, raw and desperate and undisguised, so fierce she could feel it echo in her own chest. Then the mask came back, harder than before, and he turned away. He turned away from her. The pain arrived without warning. Not emotional pain, physical, a searing, ripping sensation in her chest that stole her breath and buckled her knees. Her vision whited out at the edges. She heard Dagny shout her name from somewhere behind her. She heard boots on stone running. And then she was falling. The ground rushed up to meet her, but it never arrived. Arms caught her. Strong arms that lifted her against a chest she knew by feel, by heat, by the heartbeat hammering beneath the surface. She heard his voice above her, wrecked and stripped of every defense. Revna, Revna, open your eyes, look at me, please. She tried. The world swam in and out of focus. She could see his face above hers, and the expression on it was something she had never seen on the face of a king. Naked terror, utter helplessness. And beneath both of those, something fierce and shining and desperate that looked exactly the way love looks when it has stopped pretending to be anything else. His hand cradled the back of her head. His thumb moved against her cheek. Stay with me, he whispered. Do not do this. Stay. The courtyard had gone still. Hadrian stood 3 paces away, his face pale. Dagny was running toward them. Guards, servants, advisors, everyone was watching. And the king was on his knees in the dirt, holding a horse healer against his chest, and he did not care who saw. Revna's hand found his collar and held on. You sent me away, she murmured. I know, the words splintered. I know, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. Then the darkness pulled her under, and the last thing she heard was his voice saying her name over and over as though repetition alone could keep her from slipping away. Revna woke in the infirmary to the smell of dried chamomile and the low murmur of voices beyond the door. Her body felt heavy, waterlogged, wrung out and left to dry. She blinked against the light and tried to remember how she had gotten here. Athen sat beside the bed. He was in a chair that was too small for him, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. He looked as though he had not moved in hours. When she stirred, his head came up, and the relief on his face was so naked and so fierce that Revna felt her breath catch. "You are awake," he said. His voice was hoarse. "How long?" she whispered. "A day and a half." The room tilted. His hand was on her shoulder immediately, steadying her with a gentleness that did not match the size of him. "Carefully," he said. She looked at him. At the bruises under his eyes, the new hollows in his cheeks, the way his hands gripped his own knees as though holding himself together by force. He looked worse than he had in the courtyard. Whatever ground he had been losing to the curse, her collapse had cost him more. "Your Majesty, I need to explain. You need to rest. I need you to listen to me," Revna insisted, and something in her voice made him go still. The infirmary was empty, except for Dagny, who stood near the far wall with her arms crossed, watching them with an expression that suggested she had no intention of leaving, and no patience for evasion. Revna looked at Ethan, held his gaze. "You are dying," she said quietly. "The curse is killing you, and you know it, and you are letting it happen." The muscle in his jaw jumped. "I am handling it. You are not handling anything. You are surrendering. You think you deserve what that woman did to you because of what happened in the war, because of the people who died. And every time you feel guilty, the curse grows stronger, and the wolf takes more ground." His eyes widened. She saw the flash of surprise, then the quick shuddering of his expression as his defenses came up. Walls so practiced, they moved on instinct. "Dagny told you," he said, flatly. "Dagny told me what I had already figured out for myself," Revna replied. "I saw it, Athen. When I touched you that night, I was on that battlefield. I felt the curse go into you, and I felt what it feeds on. It feeds on the part of you that believes you do not deserve to survive what you did." The silence that followed pressed against the walls. "People died because of me," Ethan said, his voice stripped to its foundations. "Not soldiers. Villagers. Families." A girl, maybe 15, ran toward our lines carrying a white banner. She was trying to broker peace on behalf of her people, and my soldiers did not see it in time. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I carry her face with me. Every time I close my eyes, she is there. And Sethara's curse makes you relive it," Revna finished. "It does not need to make me relive it," he said. "I do that without help." Revna reached for his hand. He let her take it, and his fingers closed around hers with a grip that shook. Dagny spoke from the far wall, her voice measured and deliberate. "The curse would have burned itself out months ago if he had let it. These kinds of hexes are parasitic. They need a host wound to feed on, and without one, they starve. But his guilt keeps feeding it. That is why it has not broken. That is why it is still growing." Athan pulled his hand free from Revna's and stood putting distance between them. The walls came back up. She could see them settle into place behind his eyes. "The council has made a decision," he said, and his voice had gone flat. Controlled, the voice of a king, delivering a verdict he had already decided not to fight. "Lady Fellaine Ashworth arrives tomorrow. The bonding ceremony will take place at the end of the week." The words landed with the force of a door slamming shut. Revna stared at him. "What? A formal mate bond with a woman of strong bloodline may anchor the wolf. The council believes it is the best remaining option." "The council is wrong," Dagny said sharply. "The council is trying to save this kingdom," Athen replied, still not looking at Revna. "And I am trying to save you. If I bond with another, the pull between us should weaken. You will recover. You will go back to your life. I will die," Revna said, her voice cracking. "Dagny already told me. The wolf chose me. A forced bond with someone else will not anchor you. It will accelerate the curse, and the bond between us will tear me apart from the inside." Athen flinched. A full body flinch that rippled through him as though she had struck him. "Then at least one of us survives," he said quietly. And he left. Revna sat in the infirmary bed and felt something shift inside her. Not pain, this time. Not grief. Something harder, brighter, fiercer than either of those things. Something that felt like a decision made at the deepest possible level, the kind that rewires everything above it. She had spent her entire life being admired. The gentle hand. The woman. Every village knew, by name, every farmer trusted, every mother called upon. Men had brought her flowers. They had told her she was remarkable. They had looked at her with warmth and respect and genuine appreciation, and then they had gone home to someone else. She had been admired by everyone, chosen by no one, and she had accepted that, had swallowed it and smiled, and told herself that being useful was the same as being loved, that being needed was the same as being wanted, that if she just kept helping, kept healing, kept giving, eventually someone would see past the gift and reach for the woman beneath it. No one ever had. Until him. Until a man too broken to pretend and too proud to ask, who had left a chair with a cushion where a hard one had been and brought her elderflower tea without ever admitting he had noticed what she liked. She was done waiting to be chosen. "Dagny," Revna said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "I need a horse." The ride through the castle grounds took less than 2 minutes. She rode Raf, because he was the only horse in the stable that did not shy from her fractured calm, and because there was something fitting about arriving on the king's own warhorse, the beast no one else could touch, carrying the woman no one else had claimed. The main gate was closed. 2 guards stood at the entrance, and beyond them, through the iron bars, she could see the courtyard where the bonding preparations had already begun. Servants carried garlands of white and silver. A steward directed the arrangement of chairs beneath a canopy of silk. Musicians were tuning instruments near the far wall. The air smelled of crushed flowers and formality, and every detail of it felt wrong in a way that made Revna's blood sing with fury. And in the center of it all, standing with Hadrian and a tall, dark-haired woman in a green velvet riding cloak, was Athen. Lady Felaine Ashworth was beautiful. Poised, elegant, her bearing immaculate. Every inch the high-born woman that Revna was not and would never be. She stood beside the king with the practiced ease of someone who had been trained since birth for exactly this kind of moment. She was perfect for him, on paper. In every way that mattered, to councils and courts and kingdoms, she was the right choice, but she was not his. Revna did not care about paper. She did not care about councils. She cared about a man who left embroidered cushions on chairs and drank elderflower tea, because she liked it and had pressed his forehead to her collarbone in a room full of people, because her presence was the only thing that made his war go quiet. She rode Wrath to the gate and stopped. The stallion stamped once, snorted, and stood tall beneath her, and she felt, absurdly, as though the horse understood what she was about to do and approved. The guards stared at her. One of them opened his mouth to speak, but something in Revna's face must have changed his mind, because he closed it again without a word. The courtyard noise died. One by one, every face turned toward the woman on the black warhorse. The musicians stopped tuning. A servant carrying a basket of white roses froze mid-step. The steward looked up from his clipboard and went pale. "Open the gate," Revna said. The guards looked at each other. Neither moved. "Open the gate," Revna repeated, louder. Her voice carried across the courtyard, clear and unwavering, the same voice she used when she needed an animal to trust her with its life. Hadrian turned. Lady Felaine turned. And Athen turned, and the look on his face when he saw her was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Shock and fear and hope and anguish, all tangled together in a single unguarded moment before he could stop any of them. The courtyard was watching. The entire court, assembled for a bonding ceremony, was now witnessing a horse healer on a war horse, demanding entry through the king's own gate. Revna could feel their stares, could feel the judgment, the confusion, the scandal forming in real time. She did not care. She had spent a lifetime caring what people thought, and it had earned her nothing but distance. "Choose me," Revna said. Her voice did not waver. "You can stand there and bond with a stranger and let the curse eat you alive. Or you can choose me, not because I am useful, not because I calm your wolf, not because I am the only thing standing between you and the dark, Because I love you, and you love me, and I am done being the woman everyone admires, but no one fights for. The courtyard held its breath. Choose me, she said again, and this time her voice broke, and she let it break, because some things need to be said with the cracks showing. Athens stared at her through the bars of the gate. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The hush stretched across the courtyard, vibrating with everything that had been left unsaid for weeks. Lady Felaine looked from Revna to the king. Whatever she saw in his face must have told her everything she needed to know, because she stepped back, one step, then another. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture told the story clearly enough. This was a woman who understood that what she was witnessing was not a rival staking a claim. It was a bond declaring itself, and no ceremony in the world could compete with that. Hadrian exhaled, long and slow, and Revna saw the ghost of a smile cross his face. The beta had been waiting for this, had maybe been counting on it. Then the king walked forward. Each step was deliberate, heavy, the stride of a man crossing a threshold he could not return from. Hadrian shifted his weight, but did not intervene. The guards at the gate watched their king approach and instinctively moved aside. Athen reached the gate. His hand closed around the iron bar, and Revna could see the tremor in his fingers from the other side. "You should not have come back," he said. "And yet, here I am. This will not end well." "It is already not ending well," Revna replied. "At least, let it not end well together." Something cracked behind his eyes. The wall he had been building, the one made of duty and guilt, and the terrible conviction that he did not deserve to be saved, fractured down the center. She watched it happen. Watched the break travel through him, watched his composure splinter, watched the man underneath finally surface. "Open the gate," the king said. The guards moved. The iron groaned and swung wide. Revna slid from Wrath's back, her legs unsteady, her heart slamming against her ribs. She walked through the gate and stopped directly in front of him. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs resting against her cheekbones, and pressed his forehead to hers. "You terrify me," he whispered. "Good," she whispered back. He kissed her. In front of the guards, the servants, the advisors, Lady Felaine, the entire court. He kissed her the way a man kisses the person he thought he had already lost. And Revna kissed him back with everything she had, every ounce of stubbornness and love and refusal to let him go. The bond flared between them, white-hot and undeniable, pulling them together at a level deeper than skin or bone. Revna felt it lock into place, felt the golden thread of it wrap around her heart and his and draw tight. Her wolf surged forward, singing, alive in a way it had never been, pressing toward his wolf with a recognition so ancient and so certain that it left no room for doubt. And then she felt the curse. It hit without warning, a wall of black water, cold and suffocating and furious at being challenged. The world fell away. The courtyard vanished, the heat of his mouth, the solid feel of his hands, gone, replaced by fog. The battlefield materialized around them, smoke, mud, the terrible hush of a place where too many people had died, and the ground had not yet learned to forget them. Revna stood, ankle-deep in churned earth, Athen beside her, and the dead surrounded them. They were different from the ghosts she had glimpsed in her earlier vision. They were solid here, fully formed, and their faces were clear. Soldiers with empty eyes, villagers with wounds that would not close, wolves frozen mid-shift, caught between forms, their expressions twisted in agony, and in the center of them all, the girl. She was young, so young it made Revna's chest ache. Her dress was torn, her hands clutched a white banner stained with mud and blood, and the wound in her chest was open and dark and final. She looked at Athen with an expression that was not accusation, something worse. Forgiveness she was not permitted to give, because he would not accept it. "You could have stopped it," the girl said softly, not her words. His words, wearing her face, his guilt given a mouth. Athen's hand went slack in Revna's grip. She could feel him sinking, feel the pull of the curse dragging him down. That burning brightness was flooding back into his eyes, and this time it was not his wolf fighting to surface. It was the curse trying to swallow him whole, to finish what it had started 3 years ago in the mud of Ashenmoor. She ran toward the line. Athen murmured, his voice distant and flat, as though he were reading words carved into his own bones. She was carrying a white banner, and I did not see her. I was not fast enough. Athen, listen to me. I was not fast enough, and she died. And there is no fixing that. You are right, Revna said. The words cut through the fog. Athen blinked and looked at her, startled by the admission. You are right, she repeated, her voice unwavering even as tears ran down her face. You were not fast enough. She died. And nothing you do. Not punishing yourself, not refusing to heal, not letting this curse consume you, will bring her back. You cannot trade your life for hers. That is not how grief works, and it is not what she would have wanted. The ghost girl watched them, with those patient, borrowed eyes. Revna turned to face Athen, fully gripping both his hands. I know what it feels like to believe you are not enough. My whole life, people have looked at me and admired what I could do for them. The gentle hand. The woman who could calm any beast, heal any wound, fix any broken thing. And I let that be enough because I was afraid that if they looked past the gift, there would be nothing worth choosing. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. I made myself useful because I thought that was all I deserved. To be needed, not loved. To be admired, not held. And I carried that belief, the way you carry this battlefield. I carried it for years, and I let it shape me. And I never questioned it, because questioning it meant admitting that I wanted something I was afraid I could never have. Athen's grip tightened on her hands. She could feel his attention pulling back from the fog, from the dead, from the curse's grip, and focusing on her. But I was wrong, Revna said. And so are you. You are more than the worst moment of your life. You are more than this war. And you are allowed to put this down. I do not know how, Athen whispered. You start by letting her go. His gaze moved to the ghost girl. She stood perfectly still, the white banner hanging from her hands, waiting. The dead around them waited too, watching their king with eyes that held no malice, only the patient, terrible weight of memory. I am sorry, Athen said to the girl. His voice was raw, shredded, barely audible. I am sorry. I did not see you in time. I am sorry I could not save you. I am sorry for all of it. The girl's expression softened. The white banner slipped from her fingers and dissolved before it touched the ground. She closed her eyes. Something that might have been peace crossed her face, or perhaps relief, or perhaps release, and then she was gone. One by one, the dead turned away. Their forms thinned, became translucent, became mist. The fog began to lift. The battlefield faded. The smoke cleared. The mud dried and cracked and turned to dust, and the dust blew away on a wind that smelled of clean rain and open sky, and the first green of spring after a long winter. Athen fell forward. Revna caught him. She wrapped her arms around him as the grief he had been holding for 3 years finally broke open, as the sobs shook through him with a violence that felt almost like healing, the kind of pain that comes not from the wound itself, but from finally letting someone see it. I have got you, she whispered against his hair. I have got you. She held him until the shaking stopped, until his breathing evened, until the fog was gone entirely, and the world around them was nothing but open sky and silence, and the feeling of something vast and poisonous. Finally letting go, they came back to themselves slowly. The courtyard reformed around them. The iron gate, the shocked faces, the garlands half-strung for a ceremony that would never happen. Revna did not know how much time had passed. Seconds, perhaps, minutes. It did not matter. Athen lifted his head. His eyes were green, fully green, clear and calm, and free of that feral glow. For the first time since she had known him, tears streaked his face, but he was smiling. A small, fragile, luminous smile that Revna had never seen before and that she intended to see every day for the rest of her life. He leaned down and pressed his mouth to the curve of her throat, and she felt the sharp press of teeth against her skin, the mating bite, deliberate and certain, and claiming. The bond blazed to life, golden and warm and complete. Revna bit him back, felt his arms tighten around her, felt his answering sound vibrate through her. "I choose you," he said against her skin. "I choose you." The curse did not disappear all at once. Healing was never that simple, and Revna would not have trusted it if it had been. Grief did not work in clean lines. It circled back, it ambushed. It hid in unexpected places and surfaced at unexpected times, and the only honest response was to meet it when it came and let it pass through without building a home for it. Ethan still woke some mornings with the wolf's brightness at the edges of his vision, the memory of smoke in his lungs, and the girl's face behind his eyelids. On those mornings he reached for Revna and found her there, warm and solid and real, and it faded, and the smoke cleared, and the girl smiled at him, instead of falling. They talked about the war. Not all at once, not in grand confessions, but in fragments offered over breakfast, during walks through the grounds, in the quiet hours after midnight, when the fire burned low and the world felt small enough to hold. He told her about the soldiers he had lost, the decisions that had cost lives, the girl with the white banner whose name, he had learned after the war, was Marin. "You are allowed to remember her," Revna told him one night. "You are allowed to grieve, but you are also allowed to live." It took months, but the nightmares grew less frequent, and night by night he learned to sleep without fear. Their mating was glorious, even if the court's reaction was predictably complicated. A horse healer, as the Alpha Queen, was not what anyone had envisioned. Lady Falaine had departed, with more grace than Revna felt she herself would have managed in that position. She had paused at the gate, turned back, and said to Revna with a small, knowing smile, "Take care of him." It was not said with bitterness. It was said by a woman who recognized something real when she saw it, even if it was not hers. The whispers followed Revna through every corridor and every formal dinner for the better part of a year. She overheard them in hallways, felt them trailing behind her at state functions. The horse girl, the nobody herbalist, the woman who somehow captured a king. She learned to ignore them, mostly. On the days she could not, she went to the stables and brushed wrath until her arms burned and her mind went quiet. The horse never judged her. Neither did Dagny, who had taken to visiting Revna's chambers with a bottle of wine and unsolicited opinions about the court's collective intelligence. Half of them could not tell a wolfsbane from a dandelion, Dagny said one evening. "And they presume to judge you. They are not all bad," Revna offered. "Name one." Revna thought about it. "Hadrian is decent. Hadrian does not count. He has liked you, since you made the king fall asleep standing up." Revna laughed, and the sound surprised her. She was still getting used to laughing freely in a castle. "They will adjust," Athen told her one evening, pulling her close in the privacy of their chambers. "And if they do not, they can take it up with their king, who happens to be hopelessly devoted to his mate." "Hopelessly?" Revna raised an eyebrow. "Irrecoverably. That is not a word." "It is now," he said, and kissed her until she forgot to argue. The animals came back to her, slowly, tentatively, as her calm returned and the fracture in her gift healed. Wrath was the first, pressing his great head into her hand the morning after the curse broke, and the others followed. Within weeks she was working in the royal stables again, treating the horses, overseeing the hounds, and arguing with Dagny about poultice recipes with the same comfortable ferocity they had always shared. She had worried in the beginning that becoming a queen would mean giving up the work, that the court would demand she trade her satchel for silk gloves and her stable boots for slippers. Athen had put that fear to rest on the second day of their mating when he had presented her with a new satchel, beautifully made, stamped with the royal crest, and sized to hold exactly the number of tincture bottles she usually carried. "You are not the queen they expected," he had told her. "You are the queen they need, and this kingdom has enough people in silk gloves." It was, she thought, the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. She had kissed him so hard, he had dropped the satchel, and neither of them had picked it up for quite some time. "You look different," Dagny told her one afternoon, watching Revna work. "I smell of horse." "I always look the same when I smell of horse." "No," Dagny said, her weathered face softening into a rare smile. "You look chosen." Months later, Revna woke slowly in the pale gray light of early morning. Ethan was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, his face peaceful. One arm was draped across her waist. The other was tucked beneath his pillow in a position that could not possibly be comfortable, but that he insisted was perfect. No wolf behind his eyes, no tension in his frame, no fog waiting to pull him under. Revna watched him for a long moment, something warm and fierce and quiet filling her chest. Then she settled back against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let the morning hold them both.